before we begin the conversation, Monica, let me kind of tell everyone a little background about you so that we kind of set the note for it. Um, Everyone who's watching out there, feel free to ask questions also. I don't know how am I going to manage those questions though, because while we are talking what's happening, but I will try to answer if there are things coming up. What we wanted to talk about was something very interesting that is happening in the fashion and lifestyle domain called cultural intellectual property. I see a lot of people talking about plagiarism in the days. We see a lot of social media battles happening over it, the designers name calling and a lot of things happening. And it always used to make me wonder, but if everybody is calling out the names, why isn't anybody getting patents done around it? What's the problem? And that got me interested into intellectual property. And through those discovery, I kind of found about Monica and cultural intellectual property. So to give you a little brief about Monica, she's the author of TEDx talk, Cultural Fashion, Transform the Fashion Industry from Villain to Hero. You must go and check that out. She is a lawyer. She's a fashion lawyer. She's double specialized in EU law and international arbitration. She advises on legal matters related to fashion businesses and creative industries, in particular negotiation of buyer-supply commercial agreements, sourcing agreements, partnerships, collaboration agreements, and so on and so forth. These are certain sections of fashion which you generally don't talk about. What you generally see is the glitz and the glamour, the fashion week and the fashion shows, and a lot of buzzwords around crafts and handlooms probably right now. Those are the things that you've heard, but here we are going to talk a little more with Monica. So Monica, let us begin with the rudimentary question. What is cultural intellectual property and what got you into it?
In very simple words, cultural intellectual property is the rights of the artisans, the rights of the traditional makers. And we kind of oppose the concept, or when I coined this concept, cultural intellectual property, and attached it to the custodians of traditional knowledge, I wanted to show the difference between intellectual property tools, the conventional tools that we have so much heard about, like copyright. That's a conventional tool invented sometime at the end of the around 1890. We talk about patents. Those are for inventions. We talk about industrial property. You hear about geographical indications, a lot of debate in India about the GI tag and whether it is relevant or not for the craft space. So those are conventional tools, but they are not compatible with the nature and the specificity of this kind of knowledge that is inherited from generation to generation. This kind of knowledge that is inherited can be, for example, medicinal and biodiversity related knowledge. Can be yoga, for example, is considered this kind of traditional knowledge that has been inherited without being able to really say there's one owner who invented yoga and has a patent on it. So in the fashion space, when we talk about traditional techniques, traditional designs, these things fall under cultural intellectual property. And there are two important characteristics. This knowledge is living for centuries. So you cannot have a defined term and say, it's only valid for 10 years, like a trademark, for example. A trademark is only valid for 10 years and then you renew the trademark, because if nobody uses it, it's not fair to, monopolize that name for that specific product or service. But here, this knowledge keeps on living, and as long as someone is still using it, it's still alive. Nobody has ownership on it. The second element is this element of tradition. When we say tradition, it doesn't mean something old, something dying, something that is not evolving. Traditional only states the connection with a traditional community, with a community that has its own set of rules, set of lifestyles, its heritage. That is the idea of tradition, and not something that is static and dying, but it's dynamic, evolving with the community itself.
So did it always exist, or is it something new, Monica? What made you? Because I kind of know your story, and I want you to tell people also that story. Like, how did cultural intellectual property law come about for you?
Right. It's something that, in terms of a legal framework, is something fairly new. In terms of these expressions, we call these traditional cultural expressions and traditional knowledge. These expressions existed from forever. Since we have, textiles, you have weaving techniques, and then this is traditional knowledge. But in terms of legal framework, intellectual property came about, as I said, around 1890 something in the UK, with the invention, conceptualization of copyright. And they said, people are writing things, creating things, and for that we need to attach some kind of patrimonial, some kind of monetary compensation, and also to kind of know who the author is,
Yeah.
And then they said everything that is new, they put some conditions. They said the creations have to be new, they have to be innovative. And they said, everything that is there from before is not protectable by intellectual property tools.
Okay.
Which left, all this creation that was there before, like the cultural creations, in a way unprotected. In many countries, we call this the public domain. The public domain is a very is a notion that evolves in time. If 20, 40 years ago, we didn't talk much about cultural appropriation, we didn't talk about these things, it was not something that we discussed, then the public domain was very large. People said, yes, all these techniques are in the public domain, we can copy, we can do whatever, no problem. Today, the public domain is being restricted more and more and more, and the World Intellectual Property Rights Organization has been raising this topic for the past 20 plus years, that we need to come up with some tools. So that's how I got here. I wanted to exercise my legal skills, my advocacy skills, and my intellectual skills in general in a field that makes a change, and that helps the people that I feel most connected with, these custodians of traditional knowledge. It's an inspiring space. So then I said, let me facilitate this conversation. People don't know much about the World Intellectual Property Organization. People have difficulty, understanding these legal frameworks. So I said, I want to set up a platform where all these complicated things are made simpler. That's how we came up with tools like the 3 Cs,
Right.
the 3 Cs
What is
rule.
that 3C?
That 3C comes from credit, consent, and compensation. And we have put together here a variety of elements to come up with this rule, so it didn't just come up by night. For example, in light of the many cultural appropriation cases worldwide, many campaigns, many communities have been, raising up their voices, saying we want to be credited. Or social media actors, like in Romania, the campaign that you also know about, the Bihor not Dior, and the Give Credit campaign, that is quite a big campaign today. They also set up a cultural fashion day. So in terms of marketing social media, there is awareness that we have to give credit to traditional communities. But see, if you only...
Let me stop you there. Before we kind of go into that detail, please tell me what was that the campaign that you're talking about, because that will make our viewers know, in case they are still not aware of what was the Bihor campaign and what happened to Dior, and the entire campaign that you started. And also I see that lovely top that you're wearing, the Romanian top. So just mix that around so that people will know. Yeah.
So that campaign was initiated by a Facebook community that is now a very big movement worldwide, called La Blouse Roumaine. I was on a team that set up the NGO behind this movement but that was only so the movement started in 2013 and it grew very big, and I joined this group around 2015, and then in 2016 we set up an NGO and we collaborated together for a while until I moved out of Romania, but we continued. So the spirit and the ideas are the same, of giving credit to traditional communities. But that campaign was initiated by the founder of La Bluesroom, and I took, at that time it was, and I was in Berlin where we had an event going on the occasion of the Universal Day of the Romanian Blouse, which is on the 24th of June. And there are many communities, Romanian communities around the world, that are contributing with events and contributing to this campaign. What happened then was that the House of Dior copied a traditional sheepskin jacket, the male model, not the female model, into a female design, a female jacket, but it was an identical copy, one-on-one. So the campaign, and I think a bit before, Tory Burch had copied an identical design of a Romanian coat that was exposed at the Met in the US. So probably, you know, someone from the design team found it inspiring, and during those processes of kind of due diligence processes, someone lost, you know, track of the source, and it ended up being a plagiarism case, basically. And La Bluesroom was very active in setting up this campaign. You need to give credit where credit is due. But what we went further with the Cultural IP Rights Initiative, because of my background and because of my job, right? I was like, giving credit, but how do we move into creating sustainable development for these communities? Because just giving credit doesn't really have an impact. It's important for visibility, but we need to integrate them in the contemporary fashion supply chains. So I added to that, you know, I went into the legal documents that talk about these kind of benefit sharing models. And I said, we need to have the stage of the prior informed consent and benefit sharing, which is the second C in our 3Cs rule. So credit, consent, or maybe the first C, consent, credit, and compensation. And inspired by the Nagoya Protocol, which is an international legal document that talks about how do beauty and pharmaceutical companies and any kind of companies that are making use of genetic resources that are belonging to different communities around the globe, how are they collaborating or sharing benefits with the communities that are taking care of the specific environment, or have, you know, been growing those plants or making those teas. Or so I brought up though that thinking and that strategy into this compensation term, and said compensation sometimes doesn't have to be monetary per se. You can create development programs. You can start, you know, working with the communities long-term, sourcing from the communities, and there are different layers to this compensation.
Sure. So to kind of put the things in perspective, one of the reason I thought about cultural intellectual property was also the debate that is ongoing in the fashion industry for the longest period of time, which everybody says plagiarism, you know. And so one always argues that, but what is original in that case? You know, where is it inspired from? And when does it stop ceasing to be a plagiarized copy, and when does it become original? So in legal perspective, can you explain what can be considered a plagiarized fashion and what can not be considered plagiarized?
When you come, we have to be a bit more, like, restrict a bit the area, because when you talk about a dress and the shape of a dress, it's very difficult to claim plagiarism. Plagiarism has its essence in usually written or spoken or sang songs, you know, like that's where it has its origin. In a way, plagiarism is not maybe terminologically because we are so the best term, but it was the easiest term to say that's a one-on-one copy.
Yeah.
And the copy is the problem. Originality has to attest the test that you do for trademarks, for example, and that's maybe better because when you have the logo for a trademark, you know, the visual image, can you, when you look at it, does it seem strikingly similar? And that's a test that in the legal world is applied to determine whether a trademark is significantly different from another one, as to not confuse consumers. So here the problem is more about the risk of confusion, because if I see a printed block print, a printed block print that is technologically printed, and I've never been to India, I will say, oh, that is Dabu or that is Adrak, and that is not true. So I'm misinformed. I'm misinformed because I'm not Indian, so I don't know, it's not in my immediate reality to know that to do block print, I mean, there are people who don't know what block printing really means and how do you do it. I'm one of those people. When I first read, before going to India, reading about block printing or hearing about block printing, it was only after kind of Googling and looking on YouTube to understand, and then only after going to witness every stage of the block printing did I see that you need 4 blocks to make one piece of a pattern. It's not all in one. So that is where the risk of confusion, this risk of confusion comes in, and that's the big problem.
So who should be responsible for this? In our last discussion, we kind of talked through how in India, we have seen a lot of high-end designer also promoting the crafts of India. They are promoting it, but they are actually digitally printing it. So there is no weaving that is being done. There is no block printing that is being done. And yes, they still say it is, let's say, a patola suit. So what do you think about this? Who is responsible? Consumer should ask what kind of questions?
I hear, and this has been my, always my, not just my thought. We did a workshop in Sweden in 2018, the first workshop tailored for cultural sustainability in fashion, and actually the time when we started promoting this concept, cultural sustainability in fashion. It was December 2018, the first workshop of this kind. We gathered a few students from various programs at the Swedish School of Textiles in Borås, and we asked the same question: who is responsible? And based on the discussions that we had, people who are working in the industry at very different levels that the general consumer would not even be aware of that they exist, said, you know, this responsibility starts first in the design department. Because you get the idea and you must have seen that somewhere, or have driven inspiration from somewhere, and then you have different layers because it's in an interdepartmental communication. You have maybe the PR or the marketing that are doing the texts to promote that specific product, right? And there you have a second layer of responsibility. Someone has to do a due diligence within it. It starts from the company that is putting out that product. It's the same with any kind of product, right? If you have a good technical good, or even food, right, that is expired, if you have something that goes wrong, who's responsible for the prejudice? The producer, right? The creator, the maker. So it's not just the designer, it's a whole ecosystem, because a product doesn't come up just by the designer. I think the last ones that are responsible are, you know, the actual cut, make, trim sections who are putting in place. I mean, it's so many cases that I've heard people talking to saying, I was asked to do a design or do Romanian blouses in India. There are people who are embroidering Romanian blouses in India.
Yes.
I mean, they are not, they probably don't know that they are embroidering Romanian blouses. They are given a model, and these models are then shipped and sold in Romania, and we have Romanian blouses made in India. I feel this is a problem for us as Romanians, and it's also a problem that people who are embroidering them there don't know that that's a Romanian design, because it's damaging for your people and for our people as well in terms of cultural heritage. It's great to be able to do that, wouldn't be a problem. But it's important to say, we know, so we have created Romanian designs here in India because Romanian people don't make enough or don't create enough.
Correct.
The consumer also has, I think, a growing responsibility when we look at the world holistically. And I feel this is more like a growing kind of a conception of the world, to look at it holistically. We can no longer look now, you know, we are communicating over Zoom. We can no longer admit that our existences are not interdependent. We are so interdependent and interconnected. So the moment, you know, a cultural group is perishing, the moment they are suffering, we are all suffering, in fact. The moment we are diluting and, you know, kind of putting disrespect towards so many centuries of work and sweat and spiritual investment, this can only bring us negative karma. Like it can't go well. So it's also the responsibility of the buyers to think, do I really need so many tops from a fast fashion company, or should I invest in a handcrafted garment? Okay, maybe the designs are not the ones that you really like. Then why don't you reach out to craftspeople in your area and say, why don't you try to make this for me? Or maybe this would be a better. So customers are today engaging in co-creation more and more. And it's also on them, because it's a vicious circle. You know, the industry, the textiles industry says, yeah, but customers are not willing to pay more, so we have to make cheap. If the fashion company says we have to make cheap, you have to divide that by 5 to get to what the actual maker is getting. And if it would only be just simple stitching, that's one thing. But when you have, you know, embroideries and things that take time, when you have this fight between, or this battle between machine embroideries that feel different. They are itchy. They are not like, they are for not, maybe not for the body, they are for other mediums. When you have this battle and you realize that a few families will no longer kind of be able to live like they lived before because the machine is taking over, we need to be conscious of these things.
So that's why the question of cultural sustainability comes. So sustainability is a big buzzword going on globally. And one of the easiest ways to kind of be sustainable would be to kind of buy local crafts, right? Mm-hmm. But what does it also mean for the craft community? What is cultural sustainability according to you, number one? And number two, you visited India last year for your project. And there are a lot of buzzwords going in India also currently: Make in India, Crafts of India, handlooms. Now it is vocal for local. There are a lot of words and campaigns going around. But you have visited the clusters throughout the country. What's your take on it?
Well, I would like to make 3 points here. So let's start with cultural sustainability. Cultural sustainability is not a new term. It was brought in around 1995, first time documented in a worldwide report. And has been identified as the luxury pillar of sustainability, if you want. They said, you know, first you have people, social well-being, you have planet, environmental well-being, you have profit, we need economical well-being, and then culture. But the kind of all these pillars, they said, are very embedded in the cultural context. So cultural is part of all the 3 pillars. What we realize more and more is that the narrative, we have to change the narrative a bit. It's culture first, and from culture, understanding the culture, you can really strengthen the other 3 pillars. Because what works for social sustainability maybe in Europe doesn't work necessarily in India. And that's what I saw. And then I actually came back this year in India. So we were there with my research partner this time. growing the team, bringing more people, really looking how, as opposed to Europe, where we always talk about the triple bottom line, social, so work standards, how much we pollute, and how much money do we invest in different things. In India, there's a lot of focus on cultural sustainability, even though nobody uses at the moment this term. So not nobody, there's many. Rahul Mishra, for example, has been using it in his social media and in his speeches all the time, for a long time, or at least that was maybe the first player I found on Instagram using the hashtag, and I was like, yes, you know, you have Gaurav J. Gupta, with whom he's a member of the Cultural IP Rights Initiative with his brand Akaru, and we had tons of hours of discussions on what is sustainability in India, and how can we get away with all these buzzwords, and maybe if we focus on crafts and the sustainability of craft, sustaining craft, handcrafted production, then why not maybe focus the narrative on cultural sustainability in India and say, this is our area of expertise. We are cultural sustainability first, and then going on the other three pillars, as opposed to Europe, where they talk maybe 3 pillars first and then going to reach. Because why? You might have the cultural context dictates a different narrative. So why go away from what you have there? Very vivid, very living, very and then I connect this to the idea of made in India. So crafts of India are the strongest, the key selling point, let's say, in business words, in this cultural sustainability paradigm for India, in this cultural sustainability debate. Then why should we say made in India and not handcrafted in India? Because, you know, words are so valuable. Made in China was for a long time associated to a low quality standard, something that, you know, they had to fight for many years to come back as a, China is not just a cheap sourcing country. There's much more to it. You know, why do you have to go through the same kind of mistake, to the same loop that you're trying to actually get rid of? We see that
a lot of impact, right?
Sorry.
Words have a lot of impact.
Exactly. Terminology, like you were saying, we were touching upon this subject. Words are so powerful and they have so much meaning. And when we think that we now use English, right, to mostly to have these discussions around the world, it's not my native language, not your native language. I don't know, high percentage of people involved in this conversation, it's not their first language. So how do we find the right words? How do we connect to the terms that are native to the country that we're speaking of? And the last point on this, we set up a website for those interested. It's called Cultural Sustainability in Fashion, all in one, .info. It's a project that the Cultural IP Rights Initiative is working on in a competition for the European Commission. And we want to, it's just a bit of content now, but we're working at putting kind of a library of this cultural sustainability and fashion related knowledge for people to be able to have access to the information anytime they need.
Wonderful, wonderful. So before we end, because I think we are just almost done with 30 minutes, one last quick question, and that would be, how does, like we've already discussed, but I want to kind of revisit that topic because that is a bane of Indian fashion industry currently. And what role can a consumer play? There is a lot of cultural misappropriation happening when people are using patola, tangalia, printed pattern of ikat. So what could be the recourse for this? If a consumer is really excited about originality, what should a consumer do and what should a brand do in this case?
Probably the best solution in a way would be some type of authentication, some kind of certification of the originality. This is why we at the Cultural IP Rights Initiative, we have designed a cultural sustainability seal that is not following the same model, or the system for it would not be following the same model as all the certifications for which you pay to get the certification. But the principles are full transparency of the supply chain. So the brand would show you where is that product coming from, and having some type of element of identification whereby the consumer can know that this is indeed the original product, which means that, you know, you have contact with the community, you know who made it, or in what community it was made, what is the history of the specific craft. And if it's not handcrafted, you just write, it's digitally printed. And that's not a problem. So if you say digitally printed design inspired by the Banarsi sari, and it's not a Banarsi sari, that's very important to just be honest. And not I don't know how much in India, but in Europe, we were lucky to have legislation for consumer protection. So then you also have these institutions where the consumers can go and say, look, I've bought this and it's a false statement. So they can always then have petitions to these institutions, but maybe in India you cannot do that. And so the petitioners are the consumers themselves who put it online and say, is this original or not? And then you have to do, kind of a very shaming exercise, but slowly asking for more transparency. This is what the consumers can do. And asking questions, asking the questions. If you go to bless you, if you go to a mela, if you go to a craft market, if you go to a shop, asking questions.
That's important from the consumer's perspective for sure.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Monica. It has been extremely insightful, and I will be continuing this conversation with you on the side as well. And we wish you super good luck. And I'm sure the viewers would have gotten a lot of information about cultural intellectual property today. Please go ahead and follow Monica a-Moisin on Instagram. Check the website that she's spoken about already to get more information. And we will see you soon next week, same time, Wednesday, 4 p.m. with another session of CANDID at CICERONI Live. CICERONI is Gujarat's only fashion and lifestyle portal that talks about fashion, lifestyle, beauty, wellness, and so many more issues that are in the industry. We love to talk about it. If you have more suggestions, please do reach out to us. Monica, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Time has been flying. I hope we get to continue this conversation another time.
Absolutely, we would love to do that. And we would invite you to kind of be a part of CICERONI when you come. We would love to meet you when you come to India.
Of course, we have two members based in Ahmedabad at the moment, Asif and Amoda, and our family is strong in Ahmedabad. So it's and Biomi Conscious Fashion also has a base in Ahmedabad. So we have three members with roots in Ahmedabad.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Monica.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.